Okay, so we're going to graph tan and cotan today. And we're going to see some waves that look quite different than sine and cosine. So I'm going to kind of draw it out, and then I'll tell you at the end what I want you to put on your paper. So tan, the wave of tan is actually best centered around the origin. So it's like we're going to go into the negatives and into the positives. Versus like sine and cosine, we just started here and then drew the wave on this side only. So for tan, if I start at 0 degrees or 0 radians, the value of tan's right here is 0. So 0, 0. Then as I move around the circle, I'm going to see that as I get to 45 degrees or pi over 4, I have kind of a easy value of tan. It's just 1. So I'm going to mark off pi over 4 is at 1. And then as I get to pi over 2, on the unit circle, I can see my tan value is undefined. So undefined, I will draw a asymptote. All right, so I'm going to stop at that asymptote. I'm going to work backwards now. So I'm going to go backwards and see what happens if I move to negative pi over 4. So on the unit circle, negative angle would go this direction around. Negative pi over 4 would take us back to this amount. And I see a tan value of negative 1. So negative pi over 4, there's a dot at negative 1. And then I'm going to keep going back to negative pi over 2. So negative pi over 2 on the unit circle would be starting here. Negative would take us pi over 2 to this point, and the tan value is undefined. So again, we have a undefined line there. Now, I don't know if you can see the way this tan wave looks, but it's going to go kind of almost, I mean, it's not a parabola by any means, but it's kind of like a half parabola going up and a half parabola going down, and gets closer and closer to those undefined asymptotes. It would then repeat the same shape on both sides forever and ever, but it's not continuous because these dotted undefined lines separate each piece. So they always have to jump to the next piece. Some things to note here, key ideas: the period is only 1 pi. From start to finish of this shape, from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, it's only 1 pi long, which is different than sine or cosine. The amplitude, this value is not really an amplitude because it goes up forever, but these are very key points. These 3 points are very key. And if the amplitude changes, then this and this would change, but technically it's not the amplitude because it goes up and down forever. And then let's say the domain. The domain here is a little tricky. Basically, x cannot equal pi over 2 and every pi after that. So pi plus pi n. So every pi over 2 plus another pi n plus pi, like add the period to that, it'll hit another asymptote. And then the range, sorry, I ran out of space. The range goes down to negative infinity, up to infinity. So the range is negative infinity to infinity, which is different than a sine or cosine, because sine or cosine are always between negative 1 to 1. But this goes up and down forever. All right, let's do the Cotan graph. So the Cotan graph actually will be centered, or not centered, but more like on the positive side of the x-axis. Cotan is the reciprocal of tan. So what I'm going to do is look at these points and reciprocate their values. I'm going to start at 0. So at 0, the tan coordinate is 0. But when I do cotan, I have to do the reciprocal of 0, which means I'm flipping it and putting 0 in the denominator. that becomes undefined. So what used to be a 0 here becomes undefined on Cotan. At pi over 4, that value on tan was positive 1. If I do the reciprocal of positive 1, I do the reciprocal, I flip 1, and it's still 1. So that point's right there. And then the next point I have is pi over 2. Well, this situation for tan was undefined, which meant 0 was in the denominator. Now, if I take that and reciprocate that, now 0 becomes the numerator and some other value in the denominator that's not 0. So 0 is no longer going to be in the numerator, but 0 is not going to be in the denominator, not undefined, but eventually gets to the numerator once reciprocated, is now a value of 0. They're basically the opposite happened here. And we can start to see what's going to happen here. Now, I can keep going. I would have had to take these points over here and do the reciprocals again, but I think we can get to the next values here. So this would be 3 pi over 4. Like, I guess it would have been right here, was negative 1. And the reciprocal of negative 1 is still negative 1. And then the next point would have been at 0 up here for that piece. And then that becomes a 0, ends up reciprocal is undefined. So that's at pi. So it looks similar, but it is shifted a little bit. And it's a shift, and it is like flipped. The tan goes up and the cotan goes down, so they get a little flipped. The period of cotan is 0 to pi is the length, so 1 pi period. The domain, x cannot equal pi, that's where it would be undefined. And then it'll happen undefined every pi from then on, so plus pi n will not work. And then the range is negative infinity to infinity.